The Steam House by Jules Verne. Translated by Agnes D. Kingston. Book 2, Chapter 1. Our Sanitarium. Speaking of the great American Andes, the mineralogist Aui uses a grand expression when he calls them the incommensurable parts of creation. These proud words may justly be applied to the Himalayan chain, whose heights no man can measure with any mathematical precision. They occurred to my mind when I first viewed this incomparable region, in the midst of which Colonel Monroe, Captain Hood, Banks, and myself were to sojourn for several weeks. "Not only are these mountains immeasurable," said the engineer, "but their summits must be regarded as inaccessible, for human organs cannot work at such a height, where the air is not dense enough for breathing." This chain may be best described as a barrier of primitive granite, gneiss, and schist rocks, 1,560 miles in length, extending from the 72nd meridian to the 95th, through two presidencies, Agra and Kolkata, and two kingdoms, Bhutan and Nepal. It comprehends three distinct zones, the first 5,000 feet high, being more temperate than the lower plain, and yielding a harvest of corn in the winter and rice in the summer. The second, increasing from 5,000 to 9,000 feet, on which the snow melts in the springtime, and the third, rising to 25,000, covered with ice and snow, which even in the hot season defies the solar rays. At an elevation of 20,000 feet, the mountains are pierced by 11 passes, which, incessantly threatened by avalanches, swept by torrents, and encumbered by glaciers, yet make it possible, though dangerous and difficult, to go from India to Tibet. Above this ridge, which is sometimes rounded and then again as flat as Table Mountain at the Cape of Good Hope, rise 7 or 8 peaks, some volcanic, commanding the sources of the Gogra, the Jumna, and the Ganges. The chief are Mounts Dukia and Kinchinjunga, rising to 21,000 feet, Diodunga 24,000, Dhawalagiri 27,000, Chumilari 28,000, and the highest in the world, Mount Everest, 29,000 feet. Such is this magnificent pile of mountains, which neither Alps, Pyrenees, nor Andes can excel in loftiness, and whose summits not even the most daring of ascensionists have ever ventured to assail. The first slopes are extensively and thickly wooded. Here may be found different representatives of the palm family, which, in a higher zone, give place to vast forests of oaks, cypress, and pines, to rich masses of bamboos and herbaceous plants. Banks, who gave us this information, told us also that the snow line is 12,000 feet lower on the Indian side of the chain than on the Tibetan, the reason being that the vapors brought by the south winds are arrested by the enormous barrier. On the other side, therefore, villages have been established at an altitude of 15,000 feet in the midst of fields of barley and beautiful meadows. If you believe the natives, one night is sufficient for a crop of grass to carpet these pastures. In the middle zone, peacocks, partridges, pheasants, bustards, and quails represent the winged tribe. Goats and sheep abound. On the highest zone, we only find the wild boar, the chamois, the wild cat, and the eagle soars above the scanty vegetation, mere humble specimens of an arctic flora. But there was nothing there to tempt Captain Hood. Was it likely that his Nimrod would have come into the Himalayan region merely to continue his trade of domestic provider? Fortunately for him, there was no chance that game worthy of his Enfield rifle and his explosive balls would be scarce. At the foot of the first slopes of the chain extends a zone called by the natives the Belt of Terai. It is a long declivitous stretch of land, 4 or 5 miles wide, damp, warm, covered with vegetation and dense forests, forming favorite resorts for wild beasts. This Eden of the hunter who loves the stirring features of the chase lay but 1,500 yards below us. It was, therefore, easy to enter into these preserves, which seemed, as it were, quite distinct grounds. It was more than probable that Captain Hood would have greater pleasure in visiting the lower than the upper zones of the Himalayas, although, even after the explorations of that most ill-humored of travelers, Victor Jacquemont, many important geographical discoveries remain yet to be made. "So this important chain is only very imperfectly known?" I remarked to Banks. "Very imperfectly indeed," answered the engineer. "The Himalayan chain may be likened to a little planet, stuck onto our globe and keeping its own secrets." "They have been surveyed, though," said I. "They have been explored as much as is possible." "Oh, yes, there's been no lack of Himalayan travelers," replied Banks. "Messrs. Gerard and Webb, the officers Kirkpatrick, Fraser, Hodgson, Herbert, Lloyd, Hooker, Cunningham, Strabing, Skinner, Johnson, Moorcroft, Thompson, Griffith, Vignet, Hugel, the missionaries Uck and Gabet, and more recently the brothers Schlagenschweit, Colonel Waugh, Lieutenants Roulier and Montgomery have, by dint of great labor, made known in large measure their orological arrangements. Nevertheless, my friends, much remains to be learnt. The exact heights of the principal peaks have given rise to numberless rectifications. Formerly, Dawalagiri was the king of the whole chain. Then, after new measurements, he was forced to yield the throne to Kinchinjunga, who again has abdicated in favor of Mount Everest. At the present time, the latter surpasses all its rivals. However, the Chinese now say that the Kuen Lun Mountains, to which it is true European measurements have not been applied, surpass Mount Everest in a slight degree, and that we must no longer look to the Himalayas as possessing the highest point of our globe. But in reality these measurements must not be considered mathematical until they have been barometrically obtained, and with every precaution that a direct determination will admit of. And how is this to be done without carrying a barometer to the very top of one of these inaccessible peaks? Of course, no one has yet accomplished this. "It will be done," answered Captain Hood, "just as some day voyages will be made both to the North and South Pole." "Evidently." "Or an exploring party to the lowest depths of old ocean." "Doubtless." "Or a journey to the center of the earth." "Bravo, Hood." "As everything will be done," I added. "Even an aerial voyage to each of the planets of the solar system," rejoined Hood, whom nothing daunted. "No, Captain," I replied. "Man, a mere inhabitant of the earth, cannot overstep its boundaries. But, though he is confined to its crust, he may penetrate into all its secrets." "He can. He must," cried Banks. "All that is within the limits of possibility may and shall be accomplished. Then, when man has nothing more to discover in the globe which he inhabits, he will disappear with the spheroid which has no longer any mysteries concealed from him," put in Captain Hood. "Not so," returned Banks. "He will enjoy it as a master, and will derive far greater advantages from it. But, friend Hood, now that we are in the Himalayan country, I wish to tell you of a curious discovery which you may make, amongst others, and which will certainly interest you." "What is it about, Banks?" "In the account of his travels, the missionary Hugh speaks of a singular tree which is called in Tibet the Tree of 10,000 Pictures. According to the Hindu legend, Tong Kabak, the reformer of the Buddhist religion, was changed into a tree some 1,000 years after the same adventure happened to Philemon, Baucis, and Daphne, those curious vegetable beings of the mythological flora. The hair of Tong Kabak became the foliage of this sacred tree, and the leaves are, the missionary declares he saw it with his own eyes, Tibetan characters, distinctly to be traced in the veins." "A tree producing printed leaves!" I exclaimed. "And, moreover, on which you may read the purest and most moral sentences," continued the engineer. "That would be well worth the trouble of proving," said I, laughing. "Prove it then, my friends," answered Banks. If these trees exist in the southern part of Tibet, then surely are to be found in the upper zone on the southern slopes of the Himalayas. During your excursions, then, you can be on the lookout for this, what shall I call it, this Maxim tree." "No, by Jove," returned Captain Hood. "I came here to hunt, and have not the smallest intention of doing anything in the climbing line." "Well, my dear fellow," resumed Banks, "a daring climber like you ought to make some ascent in all this great chain." "Never!" exclaimed the captain. "Why not?" "I have renounced ascents." "Since when?" "Since the day when, after having risked my life 20 times," answered Captain Hood, "I managed to reach the summit of Vrigel, in the kingdom of Bhutan. It was said that no human being had ever set foot on the top of that peak. There was glory to be gained. My honor was at stake. Well, after no end of narrow squeaks for it, I got to the top, and what did I see but these words cut on a rock: "Durand, dentist, 14 Rue Caumartin, Paris." I climbed no more. The honest captain! I must confess that, while telling us of his discomfiture, Hood looked so comical that it was impossible to help joining him in a hearty laugh. I have several times spoken of the sanitariums of the peninsula. These resorts in the mountains are much frequented during the summer by landowners, officers, and merchants, who are scorched by the glowing heat of the plains. In the first rank we must name Simla, situated on the 31st parallel, and to the west of the 75th meridian. It is like a little bit of Switzerland, with its torrents, its streams, its chalets, pleasantly situated under the shade of cedars and pines 6,000 feet above the level of the sea. After Simla I must mention Darjeeling, with its pretty white houses, overlooked by Mount Kinchinjunga, 312 miles to the north of Calcutta, 6,900 feet above the level of the sea, about the 86th degree of longitude and the 27th degree of latitude, a charming situation in the most beautiful country in the world. Other sanitariums there are at different points of the Himalayan chain. And now to these fresh and healthy stations, rendered indispensable by the burning climate of India, was added our steam-house. But it belonged to ourselves alone. It offered all the comforts of the most luxurious dwellings on the peninsula. Here, in this delicious climate, surrounded by all these necessaries and appliances of modern life, we dwelt in an atmosphere of quietness which we might have sought for in vain at Simla or Darjeeling, where there are swarms of Anglo-Indians. The site for our sanitarium was judiciously chosen. The road, leaving the lower part of the mountain, diverged at this point both to the east and to the west, so as to connect several scattered villages. The nearest of these hamlets was 5 miles from Steamhouse. It was occupied by a hospitable race of mountaineers, who rear goats and sheep and cultivate rich fields of wheat and barley. Thanks to our able staff of attendants and Banks' directions, a few hours saw the encampment arranged in which we were to pass 6 or 7 weeks. One of the spurs supporting the great framework of the Himalayas formed a gently undulating plateau, nearly a mile in length and half a mile in width. This was covered with a thick carpet of short, close, velvety grass, dotted all over with violets. Clusters of beautiful rhododendrons, as large as small oaks, and natural arbors of camellias gave a gay and garden-like aspect to the scene. Nature had had no need to call in the aid of workmen from Ispahan or Smyrna to manufacture this vegetable carpet. Several million seeds, brought by the sweet south breezes to the fertile ground, a little rain, a little sunshine, and there lay the green, soft fabric. At least a dozen groups of magnificent trees gave shade to the plateau. They looked like parties of skirmishers thrown out from the main body, the immense forest which clothed the sides of the spur and the neighboring heights, 1,800 feet above us. Cedars, oaks, the long-leaved pendanus, beech trees, maples, mingled with bananas, bamboos, magnolias, locust trees, and Japan fig trees. Some of these giants reared their lofty heads more than 100 feet above the soil. They looked quite as if planted on purpose to shelter some woodland dwelling, so the arrival of Steamhouse was well timed. The fanciful roofs of the 2 pagodas matched well with the varied foliage, flowers gay as butterflies, and leaves, some small and delicate, others large and long, and shaped like the paddle of a canoe. The train was quite hidden by all this rich verdure. Nothing showed that it was a moving house. It looked fixed to the ground, as if nothing could induce it to stir. In the background roared a torrent, whose course could be traced by its silvery gleam many 100 feet as it descended the mountainside. It flowed down the right slope of the spur, and plunged at no great distance from us into a natural basin overhung by splendid trees. The overflow from this basin formed a stream, which, running across our plateau, ended in a noisy cascade, which dashed itself finally into a bottomless gulf. From this description it may be seen how favorably Steamhouse was situated, both for comfort for the body and pleasure for the eye. Below us lay other and lesser crests, descending in gigantic steps to the plain. All this we could see from our high place of observation. Number 1 of Steamhouse was placed so that the view to the south might be seen from the veranda as well as from the side windows of the drawing and dining rooms. Over us a cedar spread its dark green layers of shade, contrasting with the eternal snow which glittered on the distant mountain peaks. On the left, number 2 stood close to an enormous granite rock gilded by the sun. This rock, as much by its strange shape as by its warm color, reminded us of the gigantic plum-pudding stones, of which M. Russell Killow speaks in his account of his journey across southern India. This, our attendant's house, was placed about 20 feet from the principal dwelling. From the end of one of its roofs curled upwards a little stream of blue-gray smoke, showing the position of Monsieur Parizard's culinary laboratory. In the midst of the trees which lay between the 2 habitations might be seen a huge mastodon. It was Behemoth, standing under a great beech tree, with his trunk upraised, as if browsing on the branches. He, too, was stationary now, resting, albeit he had no need of rest. However, there he stood, resolute defender of Steamhouse, like some enormous antediluvian animal, guarding the way. Colossal as we had always thought our elephant, now that he stood before the everlasting hills, he, the handiwork of puny man, faded into insignificance. "Like a fly on the facade of a cathedral," remarked Captain Hood contemptuously. The comparison was good. Here behind us was a block of granite, from which 1,000 elephants the size of ours might have been carved, and this block was but a simple step in the stair which leads up and up to the topmost crest crowned by the peak of Dhawalagiri. At times, when the sky lowers, not only the highest summits but the lower crests disappear. This is caused by thick vapors sweeping across the middle zone and veiling all the upper part. The landscape shrinks, and then, by an optical effect, it is as if the houses, the trees, the rocks, and Behemoth himself resumed their natural size. When certain moist winds blow, the clouds often roll below the plateau. The eye then rests on nothing but a sea of clouds, illumined here and there by the sun's rays. All land both above and beneath vanishes, and we feel as if transported into some aerial region beyond the earth. Suddenly the wind changes. A northern breeze blows through the mountain gullies, the fog is swept away, the cloudy sea disappears as if by magic. The grand rocks and peaks stand out again, and once more our view extends over a panorama of 60 miles. End of Book 2, Chapter 1.